Scott, thank you for the introduction. I've known Scott for a number of years through the Louisiana Association for Justice. I've been a member since I graduated from LSU Law School. And in fact, I was a board member the entire time that I was in the legislature, and to include last year while I was running for governor. Many people said, you know, you really ought to cancel that membership or at least get off the board. You don't want to highlight that part of who you are while you're asking voters to vote for you. And my idea was, well, if I wasn't comfortable with who I am, I wouldn't run. And so I appreciate your work, Scott, that you do, and as a faculty advisor here. Mr. President, Dean, thank y'all for the opportunity. I will be very honest with you. I thought I would be talking to about a dozen students. And so just do I have first year, second year, and third year in here? I have a lot of folks from Louisiana and outside of Louisiana. Everybody in here wants to be a plaintiff's lawyer, though, right? No. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon. I was given some suggested things to talk about, and I will do that. And then I really want to leave plenty of time for question and answer so that you all can ask questions that might be on your mind. And I will do my very best to answer them. But if I say something along the way and I'm not clear or you want me to expound on it, just let me know and I'll do that. I really want this to be as informal as possible. I want to thank whoever put the water up here. I was hoping there would be some. First of all, you know, one of the things that Scott missed on my biography is I didn't go directly back to Amite, my hometown, to practice law. I clerked at the U.S. Fifth Circuit here in New Orleans for Judge Dennis, James Dennis, who is an excellent judge and was a great boss and a mentor to me. In fact, is still a mentor to me and an absolute workaholic. I know now why those clerkships for a year. I could not have done it for longer than that. But I did have that experience as well. But I did go back to Amite and hang a shingle and just started a general country practice. Now, my partners were my brother, Daniel, who, and by the way, it was the year 2000 when I went back to Amite. My brother Daniel was a partner. He had gone through Loyola Law School, the school right across the street, I believe. And my dad. And really the reason I wanted to become a lawyer is because I had seen my dad work as a lawyer, but he was a sheriff. He worked in Governor Edwards' administration, and he practiced law. And I saw that his degree had prepared him to do any number of things. But more importantly, I really wanted to work with him. And I'm very thankful that I made the decision when I did to get out of the Army, come home and practice law, because he actually got sick shortly thereafter with heart failure, ended up getting a heart transplant. And so we weren't able to work together long, and we lost him a couple of years ago. But about 3 years after I started practicing law, my brother, it was really 2 years after, he decided he wanted to run for sheriff and reclaim that seat that we just think belongs in our family, right? And he was my law partner, and I became his campaign manager. And we had a great time. It was a lot of fun. We didn't make much money those years, but he got elected in 2003 to sheriff, and then that left me without a partner, and because he left the practice, and I just told you my dad got ill, and so the law practice ended up really being me. It was a tremendous experience, though. To go home and to engage in civil practice, because with my brother being the sheriff, I wasn't inclined to go to court and cross-examine his deputies and that sort of thing. That doesn't work. But to go home and to really be able to help people. And I know you say, well, that's what all lawyers say they want to do. Well, that is, in fact, what we do. And sometimes we're able to make a good living at it, and sometimes we barely get by. But that's what we do. It was a very rewarding experience for me, not necessarily monetarily, but it was a great experience to be back in my hometown doing that, because I had left Amite when I was 17 years old to go to West Point. And I graduated when I was 21. I did all of the airborne training, the Ranger training, the infantry training, and I spent 8 years in the Army doing that. My idea was to spent 20 years in the Army. I had an older brother who did, in fact, do that. Then get out and go to law school. So I knew when I was a very young person I wanted to be a lawyer one day. I changed my timeline because our oldest daughter was born with spina bifida. And if you know anything about, anybody here been in the service before? Well, thank you very much for your service. You spend a long time away from family, and it happens quite often. And my daughter was pretty sick, and she required a lot of hospitalizations, several brain surgeries, and it seemed like invariably I was gone, and I left my wife to deal with that without the benefit of me being there and so far away from home that her parents and friends couldn't come and help. And so I decided to get out and come home a little early and go to law school. I did apply to Tulane, but I ended up attending LSU, which is where my father had gone to law school. So that's just a little bit about me going back then. But the reason, seriously, that I became a lawyer is because I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do when I got out of the Army, but I knew a law degree would prepare me. Because I've known people all my life some who practice law, some never practice law. Some just get out of law school, and you all may have this idea, and just go into the family business, whatever it is. But the law degree helps prepare for that as well. But that's why I wanted to become a lawyer. I was blessed, I think, to be able to go to LSU to make law review, to graduate order of the coif, and do well enough to then work for Judge Dennis that first year. Now, and I'm trying to follow this script about some things that I was asked to address. What was different about practicing law? Well, my practice was a general practice. I did all sorts of things, but most of my income, although not most of my time and not most of my clients, was in the plaintiff's personal injury business. I sort of did whatever needed to be done for the person who knocked on the door. Well, Allstate and State Farm, they never knocked on the door, but the other side did, and that was good with me because that's really where my sympathies naturally are. That's my dad, when he practiced law, that was the type of law that he practiced as well. But what was different, I guess, that I didn't expect was just the perception of our profession. And how much of a struggle that can be. And I don't think it's necessarily fair, but it's good sport. And I laugh at lawyer jokes too. I guess you all do too. But some of it really, at some point, I think becomes injurious to our profession. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to uphold the ideals of our profession and make sure that people know that it is a noble calling. And that while we have our share of problem lawyers, there is not a single profession out there that doesn't. I don't care whether it's educators or doctors or whatever. But by and large, we have tremendous people who make up the profession and do a wonderful job representing their clients. And it's easy to portray people as I guess, in a bad light if they're a lawyer. But that comes from fairly simple-minded people. And I will illustrate it this way. I have never thought poorly of someone because they're a criminal defense lawyer, irrespective of what the client is charged with. Because we are all taught that the criminal justice system cannot work without competent representation of the defendant. And so we ought to want our criminal justice system to work, and we ought to want lawyers to engage in that kind of work. And when I was running for governor, there was some opposition research being done on me, and I know that because there were 3 people camped out in the clerk of court's office for about 3 weeks. And they were just looking for the case where I had represented some rapist or some drug dealer or something like that they would be able to splash across the news. Well, I told you my brother was sheriff and I didn't do criminal defense. And so they left that and they went to see, well, what kind of crazy lawsuits has he filed? And they copied everything that my name was associated with in terms of all the pleadings. Now, if you remember right, even though you saw a lot of TV ads that were not flattering of me, none of them related to my time as a lawyer. Not that I wasn't filing pleadings and actively engaged in the practice of law, but they couldn't find what they were looking for. But you see it quite often out there today. When people decide to run for office and they're a lawyer, they go look for those cases. They go look for those clients that they can just put up some soundbite on and cause people to have a negative perception. I think that is sad. We've seen it recently as it relates to Hillary Clinton. I think she was very early in her career. A court appointed her to represent a alleged rapist whose victim was young, I think 12 years old. And so if you want to, you can say that, well, her character is so bad that she was able to represent an alleged rapist of a 12-year-old victim. Or you could have respect for the system that we have and understand that she was court appointed, and you would never try to make a deal out of that. But that's sort of where we are today, and it's incumbent upon all of us to do what we can to, I think, make sure that the public understands that we are individually professionals, but we're members of a noble profession too. And that is challenging sometimes, and a lot of people point to advertising. First of all, I like this for any advertising to be tasteful, and I think plaintiffs' lawyers can advertise tastefully and effectively. Some choose not to do that, but the fact of the matter is the Supreme Court has ruled that there is a constitutional right to that speech as well. And how the courts can deal with that, and at one time it was pretty easy. They just didn't allow it. But that was probably the wrong thing to do. But that really is one of the challenges that I think that we face. And I think that we owe one another, whether we're plaintiffs' attorneys, whether we are defense attorneys or real estate, whatever it is that we do, we owe one another the benefit of the doubt that we want to receive as well. And so as you relate to other lawyers out there, I think that goes a long way to helping the overall profession. Now, when I became a member of the legislature in 2008, in January, I was sworn in. As Scott told you, there are not as many members of the legislature who are attorneys now as there used to be. And it's very popular for members of the legislature to go to the floor as they're trying to argue one point or another to let people know they're not a lawyer. But I will tell you that in many, many cases, non-lawyers will go to lawyers to get an explanation of the bill that they're considering, only to turn right around and go to the floor and try to explain why they're for it or why they're against it. And being an attorney really does confer an advantage, I think, on members of the legislature, because you really spend most of your time looking at the current law, whether it should be changed, and if so, how. And you have to make arguments both ways, and we're trained to do that as well. And the other thing is, you may not know this, you get 8 hours of CLE credit for just being in the legislature. Now, much to my chagrin, I found out that is not the case if you happen to be an attorney in the governor's office. So I'm looking for somebody to make a little change there, so I don't have to do quite as much CLE at the end of the year, because you all have been told it's been a pretty challenging year. I've been governor for 9 years and 9 months. 9 months and about 15 or 16 days. And we did inherit a budget deficit. To close out last year was $1 billion. That was by June 30th. And then for the year that started July 1st of this year was $2 billion. We had record flooding in March across many parts of the state, and then record flooding again in August across South Louisiana. And sandwiched in between that, we had Alton Sterling shot in Baton Rouge. with the protests and demonstrations that came about in the aftermath of that shooting. And then 2 weeks after he was shot, there were 6 police officers in Baton Rouge shot, 3 of whom unfortunately were killed, one of whom remains in the hospital and struggling for his life. And of course, there are all other sorts of challenges as well. But I will tell you that I believe the combination of the military academy education that I received, the time that I spent as an officer in the Army, but the time that I spent in law school as well, and in the courtroom, have all helped me. And I'm not going to tell you that I've done everything exactly right and that I haven't made mistakes, because Lord knows that I have. But I think all of that experience together has served me pretty well to understand the challenges and to try to respond to them effectively. But it's really been a difficult year. But I'm extremely optimistic about the future of our state in the long term, because the challenges that we face are the kind of challenges that when we successfully address them, we're going to stabilize our state and set a stage for success that's going to last for decades to come. You know, most of the revenue that we raised last year, about 3/4 of it, will roll off the books in 2018. And so if we want to continue to invest in critical institutions that afford people opportunity for a better life here in Louisiana, then our fiscal session in April of next year is critically important to doing that. That's the last time we're going to have. But when we're successful and we achieve long-term structural tax reform so that our revenue stream is predictable, it's fair, and it's sufficient, we haven't had that in Louisiana in a very, very long time. And I think you're going to see us with an opportunity over time to increase our investments in critical priorities like higher education, for example. But we've already been able to do some pretty good things, and some of them relate directly to the law, some of them don't. As I stand before you today, I can tell you that there are 327,000 working poor people in Louisiana who have health insurance that didn't have it as recently as June this year. And in 3 months of the Medicaid expansion, tens of thousands of people have received preventative care that they would not have had otherwise. Diseases have been diagnosed that they would not have known that they had, including cancers. This is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. There are at least 11 ladies in Louisiana being treated for breast cancer that did not know they had before they had Medicaid coverage. And we are diagnosing diabetes earlier, so that we have a better chance to control the disease and actually save money. We've removed polyps that are going to cause cancer from men, and we've actually started some colon cancer treatments for people too. And all the while, we're saving $184 million in this fiscal year because of the Medicaid expansion. I told you all when I was running for governor last year, and this relates directly to you all, that the state of Louisiana at the end of my first term will not have the highest incarceration rate in the United States. And I am determined to deliver on that promise, because it is costing us too much money and it is not making us safer. And in fact, I think just the opposite. If you take a young man or a young woman who would benefit from a break and maybe some alternative sentencing or treatment, and instead you put them in prison with hardened criminals, guess what you get out a year later or 18 months later or 2 years later? You get out a hardened criminal, because they were just educated while they were there. And so there are other southern conservative states that are so far ahead of us on this issue, Texas, Georgia, South Carolina. It just doesn't make sense for us to persist on this path, because we are not safer. Our recidivism rate is not lower, and we are spending money that we just cannot afford to spend. And first and foremost, we have far too many people who are mentally ill and they're being treated as criminals. And that just isn't right. And so we've got a lot of work to do there, but we've got a task force studying that. They're working with a lot of different groups around the state, including the Pelican, and it just dropped off from here in New Orleans, there's a group that's working, a rather conservative group. And by the way, that's why I know we're going to be successful, because you've got conservative groups, you've got the religious right, you've got groups on the left that are all coming together around criminal justice reform. And we have to give judges the discretion, again, to sentence people without too many mandatory minimums. We have to make sure that we have diversion programs, that we have treatment programs, and those sorts of things. And we will start saving money immediately. The mistake would be to pocket all the savings and spend them elsewhere rather than investing some part of that into the treatment programs and into the reentry programs. And so we have to be very careful about that. You know, I want to echo something that Scott told you, and that is you do need to participate in the electoral process. There is an election ongoing. The election is November the 8th, but early voting in Louisiana is ongoing right now. Many of you are not from here. I hope you've taken the opportunity to vote absentee. If it's not too late, please do that. But I also want to encourage you to go further, not just vote, but to engage in public service. And you don't have to do that as an elected official. And by the way, I don't consider politician to be a bad word. Some people say, you know, when they're running for office, I'm not a politician. Well, they just told their first lie. I think by definition, when you start asking people for a vote, you're a politician. But you should be about public service. And so I want to encourage you all to consider that when the time is right. I suspect that you can't just go right out and jump into it, but look at your opportunities. There are many. I got into politics when I did because of term limits, and the legislative seat in my district in the House came open. And I decided that I could afford to run and serve, and had that opportunity. So just look for those opportunities. But you don't have to be in public office to serve. There are so many ways that you can do that. One of the things I would encourage you to do is regardless of where you go, participate in groups like the Chamber of Commerce and different organizations like that. Not only is it a way to serve, it's a good way to network and get referrals, but it's also a way to brandish the image of our profession, is joining the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis Club, the Chamber of Commerce, those sorts of things. And I hope that those of you who end up practicing in big city firms and your experience is going to be totally different than mine, you will still have the opportunity to do things like that. So I think after I talk about the political climate, I'm going to open it up for questions because I was asked to address it. And, you know, it is a difficult climate, not just in Louisiana but around the country. I guess what disturbs me most, and this is my view on this, is over the last decade or so, when I've been very active in Louisiana politics, it appears to me we are moving in the direction of Washington, D.C., where everything is done on a very hyper-partisan basis. We're not there yet. I pray we won't get there. And I'm going to do what I can as governor to lead the state in a way that we don't go there. But we see outside money coming to Louisiana all the time that is on one side or another. And it's incredible how much money folks will come into Louisiana and spend to influence the outcome of our races. Or once the races are over, they'll come in and spend money to put mailers and phone calls in people's districts to tell them you absolutely cannot vote for that, or you have to vote for this. And it just lines up very much with what you see in Washington these days. That, I think, would be a mistake for us to go down that road. I still think that the best way to tackle challenges is in a bipartisan way, because our problems are not Republican problems or Democrat problems. And so we need everybody at the table to solve them, because nobody has a monopoly on all the good ideas. Now, obviously, I registered as a Democrat because I am more in line with the Democratic philosophy, but that does not mean that I don't share the same views as many of my Republican friends. And on some issues, you know, even the very conservative members of the legislature and I can work together. But if you ever have a poisoned relationship, if you ever allow the heat of the battle of a given day to prevent you from being able to have a working relationship with an individual later on, the whole state suffers. And one of the things that I think has prepared me for that is being a lawyer. We advocate on behalf of our clients, but we don't ever have to be personally at odds with opposing counsel. And in fact, it's pretty narrow-minded to think that that's the way that you should act. And so that's what I brought to the legislature with me, and that's what lawyers, not just me, but that's what lawyers bring to the legislature and the public office is you can have a dispute, a difference on a given issue, but when that's over, the people with whom you were disagreeing and arguing against, as a lawyer how to go up and talk to that individual and make sure that on the next issue where you might be able to work together, that is indeed a possibility. Now, there are many members of the legislature who don't come at it from that perspective, and they would just as soon not work with you again. But you can't allow that to rule the day. I will tell you that I think Scott said it's a decidedly red state. I suspect that's accurate. But at the end of the day, I ran as a Democrat who voted for Barack Obama twice. I was a member of the trial lawyers. My wife was a dues-paying member through the American Federation for Teachers. I supported increasing the minimum wage, closing the pay gap with women, expanding Medicaid. I said I would issue an executive order to prevent discrimination against the LGBT community, and I won by 12 points. So when you put labels, conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, I think a lot of times it doesn't really communicate effectively. Because I get asked all the time, are you conservative or liberal? And what I say is, ask me about the issue. I'll tell you where I stand on the issue, and then you assign the label that you want. For example, and I suspect many of you will disagree with this, my Catholic Christian faith and my personal views lead me to be pro-life on the abortion issue. That is a conservative position. But it's that same Catholic Christian faith that led me to believe that expanding Medicaid was right. Well, that's a liberal position. So am I a conservative or a liberal? I don't know. I'll just tell you where I'm at. And if people would just, I think, kind of shun the labels and just engage one another on individual issues, I think we would all be better off. So I'm going to continue to lead in that fashion. You all know that I'm kind of in a run and gun battle right now with the Attorney General. And Jeff and I, we really don't have a bad personal relationship. We just literally don't see the world in the same way. And I believe that on the issues that you're reading about right now, I'm on the right side of the law. I believe I'm on the right side of history, for sure. And I decided a long time ago that I don't want to be on my deathbed apologizing for things that I knew were wrong when I did them. And so, and look, that issue around the LGBT community, that's not something that came easily for me, but I know that it's right. And in fact, I'm the third governor to sign a similar executive order. I'm the first one to have an exemption for religious institutions. But he's the first Attorney General to question my authority, or not my authority, the governor's authority, whoever it would be, to issue an executive order like that. That simply says, if you're a member of that community, by the way, that's just one of the reasons that you can't discriminate. It could be for age or race or whatever, but I included the LGBT community. And I said, if you're a member of that community and you want to receive state services, you're not going to be discriminated against. Or if you want a job, or if you want to keep a job, you're not going to be discriminated against. And if you want to contract with the state, you're going to have to certify that you are not discriminating against individuals either. It's hardly revolutionary in 2016. We will see what happens in the courts in due course. But I am convinced, as I told you earlier, I'm on the right side of the law. I'm on the right side of history. And because I told the people of Louisiana while I was running that I was going to sign that executive order, I assume I'm on the right side of politics. The Attorney General obviously believes otherwise. And we're going to see what happens with that. And I threw that into this part of the discussion because it has to do with the political climate, where I think we do have some hyper-partisanship going on, and we're not well served by it. And I suspect that were he here talking to you today, he would have given you the exact opposite of what I just told you, and that he would tell you that I was being hyper-partisan. I don't know. I just know I'm able to sleep at night when I lay my head down, being who I am and where I am on that issue. So with that, I want to stop and take some questions from you all, and hopefully you have some. Yes, sir.
You spoke a lot about criminal justice issues and defense counsel, and obviously we've got some budget problems here in Louisiana. There's a constitutional crisis in East Baton Rouge and Orleans Parish. Orleans Parish public defenders have actually stopped taking new clients because they have like something like an average of 8 minutes per client. They can't provide constitutionally adequate representation. I'm just wondering if there's ongoing talks within the legislature to address that problem, to create some sort of permanent fix, some sort of permanent funding source, because this is a constitutional crisis.
There are a lot of discussions about that, both within the framework of House Bill 1, which is the budget bill, how much money do we assign for that, but secondarily also about the way the Indigent Defender Board operates. This past year, you may know that a bill was passed to change the composition of the board and who appoints the members, and set a ceiling on the percentage of funding that goes to the State Indigent Defender Board that can be spent on capital cases, because there was an awful lot of concern. And by the way, I've had meetings with the Chief Justice of Louisiana Supreme Court and Associate Justices as well. We've had this discussion. There was concern that too much money was being spent on a very small fraction of those cases, not leaving enough then to go out to the individual offices of the public defenders around the state. So I'm not saying this is going to fix the problem, but I do believe it's going to help. But we have a lot of issues around our budget right now. A lot of people focus on the revenue that we raised, but the fact of the matter is, since I've been governor, we've cut $550 million out of our budget as well. We've saved almost $200 million through Medicaid expansion, and the rest of what we were able to do was through increased revenue, but with a lot of cuts. And you know, it is a struggle. I hear that you used the word constitutional 2 or 3 times, and I am aware of that. It does have a constitutional dimension to it, but at the end of the day, there are other things that we're spending on that also have that same dimension, and really the money is extremely tight. I am hopeful and optimistic that this reconfigured state board is going to make a positive difference, and I look forward to the day when we can invest more money in that particular system so that we can avoid those crises. I told you it's a noble thing for a lawyer to represent a client in a criminal defense case. It's not noble to spend 8 minutes with that client, and that should never be the case. And in fact, you know, there are certain safeguards that are in place where that representation is supposed to be effective. And so we have a lot of work to do. I'm mindful of it. I don't have any real answers for you today other than what we've already done in conjunction with trying to stabilize our budget, grow our revenue over time in a predictable and fair way so that we do have more money to allocate to that effort. Yes, ma'am.
I originally had the same question as Chris, but a follow-up on that about about the death penalty, if it's such a waste of money, why don't we just go ahead and work towards abolishing it in this state? Because we've funneled so much revenue. And I actually worked in capital appeals this summer. And after July, we got 12 people laid off in our office because of the cut. Same caseload, 70 people on death row. There's 80 people overall or something, and we have most of them. But now we have half the amount of our office. So what are you going to do long term to make that more sustainable, to go towards people with misdemeanors and felonies versus this whole system where it costs tons of money to keep people on death row, and there's constant violations of people's rights who are on death row, like the AC litigation?
Yeah, and that is a big part of it. We have another part of it is we have district attorneys who will routinely charge a capital offense knowing they're never going to prosecute that defendant for a capital offense. And in the meantime, it obligates the indigent defenders to go in there and prepare for a capital defense. Under the Constitution, the district attorneys get to do pretty much what they want. There is obviously a strategic advantage for them to charge in that manner. But we are having discussions with them too about not just routinely doing that, as is often the case today. And not every DA does it, but that also is a big driver in the cost of the defense system as it relates to capital defendants. And then, of course, we have a situation in Louisiana where I think we've gone about 9 years and we've executed one inmate. That inmate waived all appeals and asked to be executed, a gentleman named Borderline, if I remember, and from Denham Springs. And so you do have to start at some point saying, is it worth it for us to have the death penalty in Louisiana? I think you're seeing some movement around the country in terms of ballot initiatives, and some legislatures are doing it themselves. I think you are seeing some movement as it relates to public opinion. I can tell you my opinion in Louisiana is we are not yet ready to scrap the death penalty. But we don't even have in place today a reliable way to administer the death penalty because we have gone to an injection method to cause death that a reliable source of the chemicals, the drugs, if you will, are not available. And so it's not happening. And of course, I guess it's theoretically possible that logjam will break any day now. But I will tell you, I don't think the state is ready to abolish. The state of Louisiana is ready to abolish the death penalty. But there are some things that we can do, I believe, to rein in the costs. And it is true, and because I sat on the Judiciary Committee, and every year there would be a dispute between the district attorneys on the one hand and the indigent defenders, and especially those who work the capital cases, as to the proper allocation of limited resources. And the DAs were in there, and they're friends and supporters of mine, but they were in there really wanting to be able to control how their adversaries were spending their money, which never seemed to me to be appropriate. And there was some blame on the district attorneys themselves because of the way that they charge cases in the first instance. And so hopefully we can work through that and make a positive difference. But that is going to be a real challenge going forward. Yes, sir.
The extraction of fossil fuels in Louisiana creates a lot of jobs, and those companies have a lot of political influence.
Yeah.
But those jobs are going to go away eventually, whether they're replaced by alternative forms of energy, or whether the extraction just becomes too expensive to be worth it, or whether we simply run out of fossil fuels because it's a finite resource. So what are some specific growth areas in Louisiana that you see where we can replace those jobs?
Well, a huge one, and I'm going to a Walton Foundation supper here in New Orleans when I leave here to talk about coastal restoration and protection. That is a huge area where we can take people, and by the way, I think it's going to be a long time coming before the oil and gas industry ceases to employ a lot of people in Louisiana and ceases to extract a lot of oil and gas and ceases to make a lot of money. Now, they're not doing it right now because of the cycle, but that's the nature of that business. We've seen it before. But we can do things around coastal restoration that will create lots of jobs. Next year we have the revision on the Coastal Restoration Master Plan is due in 2017. You're going to see a plan for 50 years worth of coastal restoration and protection projects, and the price tag on that plan is going to approach $100 billion. $100 billion hires a lot of people, and we can actually develop expertise relating to coastal restoration protection, how you deal with subsidence and sea level rise and saltwater intrusion and erosion all at the same time. We can be leaders in the world on that and use that expertise almost as a commodity to export around the country and around the world, because we are in the United States of America. Louisiana is just positioned where we're feeling it first, but many more states and many more countries are going to feel that. But we have to diversify. The good news as I stand here before you today is, despite all of our challenges, if I'd have been the governor in the early 80s, oil and gas revenue for the state of Louisiana would have accounted for 42% of our budget. Today it's about 12%. Now, it's 12% of a bigger budget. It's still a lot of dollars, but it's not nearly what it used to be, and that's because we have diversified, and we're going to have to continue to do that. The low cost of natural gas is allowing companies that for years were operating overseas to come back to the United States, and specifically to Louisiana, to take advantage of our ports here in Louisiana, along the Mississippi River and over in Lake Charles. The pipelines are already in the ground, and gas is cheap, and it's plentiful, and it's going to be cheap and plentiful for a long time. And natural gas is a feedstock for basic chemicals. So we're going to have chemical manufacturers coming to Louisiana for a very long time. And one of the things that I'm working on is promoting, in fact, you all at Tulane are going to benefit from this too. We want the U.S. Department of Energy and Barack Obama, before he leaves office, to designate our proposal as the Center for Manufacturing Excellence for chemical manufacturing, and we want to house that. We want to place that at LSU in Baton Rouge. And we want chemical manufacturing going forward to be as green as it possibly can be and be as efficient as it can be, because the demand for their products is just going to grow, and especially as the world population increases, as packaging material, the demand for packaging material and automotives and that sort of thing increase. So that is a great opportunity to create jobs. Now, one of the challenges is we've become so good and so efficient in the way we manufacture things that while you may employ 2,000 people to build the plant, you can operate it with 60. So the permanent jobs quite often are not there. So you have to look at the impact it's going to have on indirect job creation. And so, but that is one area where we can continue to invest, and we are doing that. Those investments, although, have to be reasonable. One of the things you've seen me do recently is scale back the industrial tax exemption program, because we, in my opinion, those 10-year 100% property tax exemptions in many cases, and in fact the majority of cases, those manufacturers were creating zero jobs. And you can't justify the industrial tax exemption program if you separate it from job creation. And so we're trying to draw, I think, a more reasonable balance, and we're still going to have the most generous tax exemption program in the country. But right now, it is just off the charts generous, and we cannot afford it. But we're going to have to continue to diversify. There are really going to be a lot of areas that we can do this. I think you all here see an awful lot of movie production. You used to see an awful lot. It slowed down. But you're going to see a lot of that come back, because the truth is the cap that we created isn't the problem. We set a cap at $180 million a year in that motion picture investor tax credit. The most we had ever paid out in any year was about $184 million. But the industry got spooked when we changed the program. And so we're going to try to reassure the industry that there will be stability here, and that we're not going to pull the rug out from under them as it relates to the motion picture industry. But there were some things that we did that just doesn't make sense. The recent movie that came out about the BP oil spill, $38 million. That's more than we give UNO to operate in a year. And so we do have to, and by the way, the changes that we made, we're not going to have those kind of payouts going forward, but we do have to put some balance there as well. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, well, first of all, we need to destigmatize mental illness, period, even as it doesn't relate to the criminal justice system, because people are afraid to seek treatment because then they might it might be known that they have mental illness and they won't be able to get a job and that sort of thing. But as it relates to the criminal justice system, we know that when an officer is called out to investigate some incident, in many cases it is hard to distinguish between whether that individual is a criminal or whether they are mentally ill and acting out. But there are experts that can be brought to bear to figure out which it is. And if they're mentally ill, they need to be diagnosed as such, and treatment needs to be offered, and they ought not be housed in our jails and our prisons where they're not getting cared for, and only to get out at some point and they still not being diagnosed and treated, and they're going to repeat that behavior or something similar, maybe something worse. And so we have to intervene with a better way to identify and then to treat and make available to those individuals prescription drugs if necessary, and then follow up with wraparound services so that they're successful. One of the things that the Medicaid expansion will do for us, as an individual gets out of prison, they are presumptively eligible for Medicaid. So they can leave with a card. And if they've been identified as mentally ill, they can leave with a card and an appointment to go see somebody. And that card also is going to allow them the opportunity to access prescription drugs and that sort of thing. And so it has the potential to help us to save money in a big way. But the good news is, as we gather here tonight, other states are ahead of us. So we don't really have to reinvent the wheel. We can go look and see what other states have done as it relates to Medicaid expansion and the criminal justice system, but beside that as well. It is hard, however, to come up with comprehensive plans that will work that don't require some additional investment. And we don't have a lot of additional dollars right now to invest, but that doesn't mean that we can't start. That can't be an excuse for us not to do anything. And so we're working. Look, my brother's the sheriff in Tangipahoa Parish. He's got 525 inmates. I don't know. I've talked to him. I think at any given time, 40 or 50 of them are probably mentally ill. That's and that's in one parish. Think about what's happening statewide. Think about what's happening in our prisons. So we can do better. I know we can do better. Ultimately, we will save money too. But it shouldn't all be about saving money. It's just wrong to treat someone who's ill as if he or she's a criminal. It's just wrong. And we can do better than that in 2016.
Governor, I think your staff indicated you have time for one more quick question. Yes. One more quick question.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
School boards,
sure.
supporters of candidate. What should they do, and how can they find out about how they can do that?
Well, what's going to come to you all easier than anything else, especially if you're going to be practicing in a state that elects judges, is you're going to find a way to get involved in those elections. But beyond that, you're going to have children who you're going to want educated in a sound school system. And so you're going to want to be involved either as a candidate or finding which candidate running for school board in your district is the best candidate, believes what you believe. But the possibilities really are endless. You know, I've been in Washington, D.C. 3 straight weeks looking for recovery dollars. Many of the staffers that I was working with, Republican and Democrat, House and Senate alike, they were lawyers. They were young attorneys, and they work extremely hard. They're very bright, but that's one good way to get started and to serve. Really, and by the way, I didn't intend to run for governor when I went to Baton Rouge 9 years ago. I got to Baton Rouge and became very disappointed with what I saw, and decided that as one of 105 members of the House, one of 144 members of the legislature, that my ability to influence things in Louisiana was very limited. And after 2 terms, and I'm not asking you to agree with me, but I'm just telling you what motivated me. After 2 terms in the legislature with Bobby Jindal as governor, I just decided, and I turned to my seatmate one day and I said, it's time to go big or go home. Because I was that frustrated with the direction of our state. I thought we were critically underfunding critical priorities like higher education. We were doing things in the healthcare arena that didn't make sense to me. I thought we weren't doing a very good job in our K-12 system, all sorts of things. So that's why I ran. So when you take that step towards public service, even though it may be at a relatively low level to begin with, it could whet an appetite so that you continue in public service and moving up in office, or you may, like me, get so frustrated that you just decide that it's time to run for that higher office. But the possibilities are endless out there. And again, you don't have to hold elective office to be a public servant. There's a lot of ways to do that. Really, as members of the bar, you're going to be a public servant.
Thank you,
You will. Thank you very much, Scott.